Welcome to the first in a series of online interviews with Richard Harvey, psychospiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher, to discuss the Novena teachings. My name is Rob Meager. I'm an interfaith minister. I lead a spiritual ministry initiative in Ottawa, Canada called Spiritual Guidance, and I've been a student of Richard Harvey's work since 2012. Today's interview will discuss the Novena teachings as a whole. The Novena teachings is a 9-part lecture series, and each subsequent interview in this interview series will explore in more details each one of the lectures in the Novena teachings. The manuscripts for all of these lectures are contained in an ebook entitled Moksha Dawn, which is available through the Sacred Attention Therapy website. Moksha Dawn is one of a trilogy of 3 ebooks, each containing 14 lectures, totaling 42 lectures. The second ebook is entitled Dharma Sky. The third ebook is entitled Bodhi Ocean and is currently in production. All ebooks are available through the Books page of the Sacred Attention Therapy website. You can also listen to the full recording of many of these lectures in this series on the Lectures page of the website. And lastly, you can view many other interviews on the Videos page or on our YouTube channel. The URL for our website is www.sacredattentiontherapy.com, and on our website you can click on the YouTube channel icon to view the videos on our YouTube channel. And now a little bit of background about Richard Harvey. Richard is a psychospiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His work emerged out of the human potential movement of the 1970s. He trained with many teachers in humanistic and transpersonal approaches. He is the founder of Sacred Attention Therapy, a radical new approach to inner work for the 21st century that proposes a 3-stage model of human awakening. Richard is the author of Your Essential Self and the Flight of Consciousness, among many other publications. He works with people all over the world, and his forthcoming book is entitled Your Sacred Calling. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the call Richard Harvey.
Hello, Robert.
Hello, welcome. Good to be with you.
And you. I'm with you.
And we have the joy of starting off a new lecture series, the Novena teachings, today. And as I mentioned in the intro, it's a 9-part series, but today we'll be talking about the series as a whole. And as I have asked with other lecture series that we've begun to talk about, where did you receive the inspiration for the title of this series? And the full title of the series is actually The Novena Teachings 9 Jewels of Sacred Approach, hence the 9 lectures. But where did you receive the inspiration for the title?
It really just came out of the air. I think that the Novena series was, it felt, each of these series of lectures all has a different feeling to me. It's a different experience to be involved in them. But this was quite specific in the way in which I've always been interested in the way you approach something. Somehow the outcome is inherent in that. If you approach something with respect or reverence or carelessness or disdain or something that is somehow inherent in that approach, in that attitude, in that entering the gate, in all the ways in which we might say that. And the novenas, of course, comes from the Christian tradition, and there seemed to be something inherent in that. I was led to it. I was merely led to the word and the Novena teachings and the 9 jewels. And I think one of the themes in the sacred attention work, in my work, has been as everybody would know by now who's listening to these talks or these interviews, psychology and spirituality and where they meet and what the relationship is. And I become increasingly aware that psychology has been a part of spiritual tradition for a long time. And in a way, what I'm doing is I'm pulling it back. I'm pulling it away and back from the spiritual tradition. For the simple reason that in the 21st century, we have such an enormous complexity of what I call ego processes, and therefore a much more dense psychological obstacle to any kind of shedding of attachments to almost anything, let alone ego patterning and so on, let alone entering into the spiritual. So I am proposing a different structure where we take the psychology that, for example, Buddhism or Christianity, Sufism, and many other spiritual paths have always incorporated, and say now in a way, look, psychology's grown up, and psychology is also spiritual. And spirituality used to be very psychological, but now we can expand our sense of both. And we can restructure it to say that once you've shed psychological attachments to the ego patterns and restrictions and limitations from your conditioning, you can really embark on an authentic spiritual practice. And so therefore make a demarcation, really, between work on the self and work on that which we can't really speak of, or the truly spiritual life. And I think there's a call for that. There's a call for a deep spirituality. And just the last thing to say about the novenas, which is this idea of approaching this great calling of the spirit, is I'd like to offer the idea of spirituality being a different thing in the 21st century. Not merely meditating or reading the great scriptures and all of this, but the great tradition or the perennial philosophy, furthered, extended, developed. There's no reason at all why it should remain static. It's been a great tradition. But let us be more adventurous, and let us, more than anything else, respond to the needs of the time.
So why these 9 jewels? And what I'm referring to is the title of each of the lectures, and I'll just very quickly for the listeners share them. They include lectures on surrender, relationships, anger, now, disenchantment, love, maturity, devotion, and awareness.
Yeah.
So
I don't know why, Rob. I don't know why. All I can tell you is it unfolded in a very lovely way. For me too. It unfolded, and I was there thinking, well, 9 jewels, of sacred approach and so on. It isn't defining, if you see what I mean. I can see in the words, it doesn't say, these are the 9 issues, these are the 9 things. It doesn't say that. It's saying 9 jewels of sacred approach. Maybe there's 18, maybe there's 7, maybe there's as many as pebbles on the beach. I don't know. But somehow what I felt as I was writing and this material was evolving was that these were somehow the nub of it. People are very interested and concerned in each of these, I think, as a way, as an obstacle or an opportunity, works both ways, through their psychology, into spirituality if they have the inclination. So, love, now, disenchantment, these are the big themes, or these are big themes.
Yes. And what resonated with you, as you're expressing, in going into the lectures, obviously is what came out, because these 9 in particular resonated with me, and also resonated with some study groups that I led based on these lectures. The topics, and then using some of the material. And I'd have to say, relative to the other lecture series, because some of the other lecture series on the surface appear esoteric, these felt more grounded, more down to earth in terms of how they play themselves out in people's lives. And as you said, they're not necessarily the 9 jewels, but they are 9 jewels. They're 9 focal points that do present themselves quite regularly in our everyday lives. Would you like to share a little bit about any of the lectures or each of the lectures, so that those listening will have a sense of what they're about?
I think what I'd rather come at it from this point of view is I know I could say it about probably each of the series. I mean, at this point we had the Sashti Porthi, the Panchavati, and the Silent Thunder series, hadn't we?
Yeah.
So this was the 4th series, and for people listening who may not have heard this before, they perhaps need to know that I don't know what I'm doing. You know, and I mean, I know that's a hard one to put across, but I seriously don't know what I'm doing. And there was something very blessed about all of the Novena teachings, and also slightly humorous for me, because I am one of those people who, of their generation, it was very common, you know, if you were born when I was born and you went through the counterculture and you got interested through Hinduism or Buddhism and all this kind of thing in spirituality. I mean, in reality, something had already happened, but by the time you became a teenager, the Eastern religions were what was stirring things up and giving you a structure and giving you a way in to, say, meditation or yoga, but also to the spiritual search. It was rarely Christianity, for example. And so therefore, I'm identifying myself with that group or that generation who had at least a lot of ambivalence about Christianity, if not downright negativity about Christianity, because we had it in school. You know, we were force-fed it, and everything to do with the establishment was thrown out. You know, if you were born when I was born and you were a teenager in the mid-60s, you threw it out just because it was in the establishment. So Christianity went, and we had a lot of justification for that, because after all, Christ never taught you to meditate. You know, he didn't do yoga. He didn't do, you know, this is the way we saw all this. And there were a few weird stories about seeds and, you know, the sun coming home and things. But I mean, you know, we'd been force-fed it. So we were very biased, people of my generation, towards Eastern religion. So even today, when you're as old as I am, you know, you're going to be 63 this year, and whenever the novenas was, I was, you know, it was last year or something, or the year before, whenever it was. But to have this novena idea coming in, and this whole story around the upper room and the Holy Spirit descending after the death of Christ, after the mystery of Christ and Golgotha, and the, you know, the resurrection and all of this kind of thing, was really curious to me. It was really strange in some way, and also slightly humorous, because it made me turn on this younger guy who's still in here somewhere and say, you know, and Christianity, and of course, and Christianity. So it always had a blessed feeling, and this blessing was inherent in the novena. You know, invite everybody to look it up, you know, what novenas are about and how they're associated with the upper room and the disciples in there receiving the Holy Spirit. And somehow that was also the experience of being me in these teachings, because I was just sitting here and it was dropping in.
You shared, as you began to talk about each of these lectures, that quote, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm hoping the listeners, if they don't currently, but they in time, as you have said, Richard, recognize the wisdom in I don't know what I'm doing. It also reminded me one of the dear souls who attends one of my discussion groups. They're frequently they will share during a discussion group how blessed they feel when they're out of their mind. and to the uninitiated, that sounds quite bizarre. But to the aware person, there is a great wisdom in the idea of feeling joy when you're out of your mind, when you're out of your ego. It's a wonderful expression. I don't know what I'm doing.
I don't know how old that participant in your group there is, but I mean, it is one of the lovely things about getting older and getting more forgetful and getting more, I become that guy who doesn't know where his glasses are and they're on his head, and all of that. And I thought this will never happen to me. Or I'm that guy saying, where's my glasses? I've got one pair in here and another pair on my head. It gets worse, But you see, I think, if you look at it clearly, that whether it's the eyesight or the forgetfulness or the, all of these things, that actually old age or middle years into old age really is a preparation for letting go of all of this.
Yeah.
And it's one, I don't know if I'll ever get round to it, but it would be lovely to follow James Hillman and other people in writing a book about senior years in a way that recasts the whole thing, because it's lovely that we have a world now with lots more old people perhaps than ever before. Actually, a lot more young people than ever before. And there's something we can do with that, but particularly by revisioning the role of older people in the society and what's actually happening to you, which is, of course, of wisdom.
I have,
of course.
I have some rather radical thinking for our modern times on this idea of the balance of youth and the seasoned citizens, but that perhaps for a whole other interview and discussion. You provide an introduction to the Novena teachings in Mokshadam, which is the ebook containing all the lectures. And you begin by sharing in this introduction, quote, "For the purposes of the introduction, I am going to assume that I am speaking to the modern day sadhu," end quote. What do you mean by the modern day sadhu?
I mean the spiritual practitioner who approaches his practice with discipline, with earnestness. So therefore not the dabbler, not the dilettante, not to say that the dilettante or the dabbler can't become the disciplined practitioner, but I remember an old teacher of mine, where he sat there in a group and he said, discipline, we don't really like the word, do we? But there's a time for it. And happily for me, it wasn't my time for it. And I remember hearing this, and it was one of those things you kind of squirreled away somewhere inside. And then as the years turned, there came a time, everybody approaches this time, and you have this, if they're spiritually inclined in terms of practice and growth and development. And these are the times when you do the thing that you don't want to do, which is another theme which I talk about fairly repeatedly. A way, let's say, put it this way, a way of distinguishing the dilettante or the dabbler from the sadhu, in the sense of the earnest practitioner who brings discipline and persistence and application to the practice, is that he's not phased or she's not phased by the resistance. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't feel like doing this now, or I don't want to do that, or I like the look of that. It looks better than what I got over here, or any of those sorts of obstacles to spiritual sadhana, which is another word I use alongside sadhu. These are imported from the Sanskrit for the reason that we really just don't have equivalent words. We have to say lumpy phrases like spiritual practitioner and earnest, disciplined practice or something. So sadhana and sadhu are just lovely words. They're very evocative. I think they resonate with ancientness somehow. And we can bring them in and revision them in the 21st century by way of saying, look, this is spiritual truth. It isn't dabbling. You do get there by persistent application. You do have to go beyond what your ego says you can manage, and it is well worth it. Well worth it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I relate to it so well with my meditation practice, where I can go for extended periods where it just doesn't feel like what I think it should feel like. And yet I always just come back to just sit and be quiet. Don't judge it. Just sit and be quiet. Just enjoy the silence. And let go of all the expectations of, what it should feel like or what it shouldn't feel like. And that, for me, anyway, is how I relate to the concept of discipline. You just do it regardless of how it feels, because somewhere very deep inside you know it to be good for you. It's just part of a healthy diet.
Well put. And just before we perhaps move away from that, just because I hear a sort of inherent question in there, and it is, how do I begin that? That for me, the learning of that was from a man called Reverend Master Daishin, who I think is still in Throstle Hull Abbey in north of England, as a Zen training monastery, and he was is a wonderful Zen Buddhist Roshi, a Zen master, a wonderful man who I enjoyed being with for several months and learning from him absolutely everything he did. And he one day said to me, my life changed when I made a commitment to myself to sit in meditation for 5 minutes a day. And there was a part of me, because I'm a young man at this point, I don't think 5 minutes is much. I mean, I find it much, but when he said that, I thought, so small? So small. And then I realized the wisdom of it over the years. You start small because you can do that. And then you build up your sense of discipline and application. But it was a lovely humility. And he just said to me, my life changed. I made a commitment to sitting for 5 minutes a day. And this guy, I sat in sessions with, which is constant sitting, for days, weeks, wonderful periods of sitting, and he was sitting even when he wasn't sitting, so he was always centered.
I think the key there that you bring up is the meditation practice becomes the focal point of one's life, around which everything else revolves, as opposed to the opposite, which might be the norm, at least in Western culture, is we have our normal everyday life and we try and fit in the meditation. So the meditation is trying to revolve around our busy lives. Well, what so often happens is you get to it when you get to it, because it's not a focus. But when you invert it and you reverse it, and the focal point becomes the meditation, then all else in life revolves around the meditation. And so exactly. The 5 minutes that his life changed because he declared a devotion to only 5 minutes is why his life changed, is because it was inverted, and now the meditation was the focal point, as opposed to all else.
It's enough, because it's not how much, or it's not a quantity thing, it's a depth thing, it's a... it's about quality, and I think that's what the novenas were about. Is it's a sacred approach. How do I approach? Not how long does it take me to approach, or how many years have I put into refining the approach. That's not it. It is a depth of reverence, perhaps respect. I think the novenas partly used things which can actually be very difficult. Anger, for example. Anger is in there. Disenchantment is in there. There's negative things alongside positive things, both of which can enhance the approach, or can be an obstacle to the approach.
And let's see where that leads us when we come together the next time to begin talking about each of the lectures. And the first one will be surrender, which is the first beautiful jewel in these 9 jewels. And
good place to start.
A good place to start. And I look forward to it. Thank you for
Me
today,
too.
Richard.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.